Utah Beach, just here. This is the little road running behind the beach that we drove down. This here is exit 3, where we were a minute ago, about 1.5 miles up the coastline. And I showed you loads of bunkers here at the end of exit 3, very, very strongly fortified. We didn't see exit 4, you're going to have to take my word for it. Same thing again, very, very strongly fortified, and about halfway between the two here, Stützpunkt 9, another very strongly fortified position. We're down here though, at exit 2, and as I showed you a minute ago, there's virtually no defences here at all. This is the spot on the beach where the US Navy were initially asked by the US Army to drop the troops off. The US Navy came along, took one look at the beach and said, no chance. Unfortunately, with the huge tide here in Normandy, when the tide rises and falls, it exposes, it rises and falls about 20 feet, but generally speaking exposes about 1/4 mile, about 400 meters of an open sand between the high and the low water mark. So it'll give you about that there. Trouble is, the further south you go, the closer you get to Carentan, which is down here. Carentan has got 7 major rivers coming out of it, and it is a river estuary. And when you go into a river estuary, any sailor will tell you that it gets very, very shallow. All the silt that the river's carrying out gets deposited. And the further south you go, the closer you get to the river estuaries, which are down here. And so when the tide goes out here, opposite exits 2 and 3, instead of exposing about 400 meters of that sand, it actually exposes nearly 1,000 meters, or just short of 1 kilometer, of open beach between the low and the high tide mark. If you see those poles sticking out of the sea offshore, when the tide is fully out, it is over 300 meters, the other side of the furthest one of those poles that you could see. So on D-Day, the Navy said, we're not going to drop you off opposite exit 2 because it's way too shallow for a landing. What we're going to do is we're going to drop you off up here opposite exits 4 and exits 3. You fight your way inland, you neutralize these German bunkers here, you then come down the road, you can open up exits 1 and 2 on your own. And the 4th Infantry went, but hey, what can you do? On D-Day, 4th Infantry Division around here, floating around, and they're being guided into the beach. They were meant to be being guided in by 2 US Navy patrol boats. They had to leave one of the patrol boats behind though in Portsmouth. It had fouled its propeller on a lobster pot rope as it was leaving the port. And so they only had 1 patrol boat left. They was doing a grand job of bringing them into the beach on the morning of June 6th, but it ran over a mine on the sandbank of Lake Convey about 5 miles offshore, and it blew up and it sank. What does the Army know about boats? Bugger all. You need the Navy for that. So they rang up the Navy and they said, how's it going? We're the 4th Division Invasion Fleet. We're sort of meant to be invading France today, but our patrol boat's blown up. And we don't really know where we're going, so we'd really rather like you, if you wouldn't mind, to send us another one. And the Navy said, no problem, it'll be there in about 45 minutes. Sure enough, 45 minutes later, the new patrol boat turned up. But you don't really see it, but have a look at the coastline here, and the one thing you'll notice, no promontories, there's no headlands, there's nothing here to tell you where the hell you are. Not only that, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, it's still dark. The Air Force and the Navy actually managed to hit Utah Beach as well, because you missed Omaha by a factor of nearly 3 miles, but that's this afternoon's story. Suffice it to say, everything is covered in dust and smoke and fog and everything else. When the new patrol boat arrived up, they had no choice but to assume that the 4th Infantry Division had been left in the right place by the previous assault boat, which they had. What they didn't account for was what the Army hadn't accounted for, was the wind and the current, which had pushed them in the 45 minutes over 1.5 miles southwards of where they were supposed to be. So when they came into the beach on the morning of June 6th, they ended up coming in here and landing right here opposite where you are today. On the spot on the beach where the US Army had initially asked to be dropped off, where the US Navy had said, we're not going to drop you off, where the Germans had said, nobody's going to be stupid enough to land here because it's way too shallow for a landing. So we're not going to build any bunkers. And because of a whole bunch of whats, ifs, buts, maybes and they won't, all combined together to make Utah Beach landings one of the least dramatic of all the 5 landing beaches. When they landed on the beach here, the 4th US Infantry Division suffered only 24 men killed and 50 wounded, 74 casualties in total, getting on shore and cleaning out these German bunkers here behind you. By the simple expedient of sending the men 200 meters inland, you were through the vaunted Atlantic Wall. By then simply skipping up the coast and taking the German bunkers from behind, the 4th Infantry Division were able to clear out 6.5 miles of coastline running north, 3.5 miles of coastline running south. The infantry managed to get in as far as Saint-Méglise, although the tanks didn't get in there until the early afternoon of June 7th. But ended up making Utah Beach basically the most uneventful of all the beaches. By nightfall on D-Day, the 4th Division had suffered only 197 casualties in total. People think casualties automatically mean dead. Yeah. No, it doesn't. Casualty, killed, wounded, captured, missing, a soldier who for whatever reason cannot carry out his functions as a soldier is a casualty. Of the 197 casualties suffered by the 4th Division, less than 50 of them had actually been killed. The vast majority of those, over 25 of them, had been killed offshore when one single landing craft was hit and it sank with 5 tanks on it, taking 26 men to the bottom with him. And this is the initial landing here on the beach. But gives you a little bit of an idea of, unfortunately, that Utah Beach has sort of become the forgotten landing beach. Quite simply because when people do look at Utah Beach, they all tend to, generally speaking, overlook the beach landings themselves entirely and simply concentrate on what the paratroopers were doing inland. And as a result,